On a cold winter morning, frost clung to the windows of the cabin, and silence fell over the woods. Jack Miller stepped out into the snow, wearing only his old brown boots, the cold piercing his skin as he squinted at the pale horizon. Beside him, Rex, his German shepherd, silently walked through the drifts, his thick fur bare against the cold, his breath puffing in the icy air. In the white expanse, through the drifting snow, a small figure appeared. A little girl in a torn red dress, staggering forward, her hands shaking, her eyes wide with fear. Jack stopped, the crunch of snow under his boots echoing in the silence. Please support us by subscribing to our channel. Behind the pines, something moved, faintly but deliberately. The woods were not empty. Danger awaited just beyond the light. Chapter 1. The veteran and his companion. The morning sun rose pale and distant over Duluth, its weak light struggling against the weight of winter. Snow blanketed everything in sight, the roofs, the trees, the narrow path that led to Jack Miller's small wooden cabin on the edge of the forest. The air was sharp, filled with the scent of pine and cold iron from the nearby frozen river. The world here was quiet, almost sacred in its stillness, broken only by the groan of the wind scraping through the branches. Jack Miller stepped outside, boots sinking into the snow with a muted crunch. He was 52, tall, about 6 feet, his build still sturdy despite the years. His face was weathered, marked by lines carved deep from both wind and memory. His hair was peppered with gray, cut short around the sides, and his beard, trimmed but thick, framed a jaw that had once clenched through gunfire and silence alike. His gray-blue eyes carried a kind of steady melancholy, the look of a man who had seen too much and spoken too little. After 2 decades in the service, war had taught him the language of silence, and now silence was the only thing he trusted. He reached down to pat the neck of Rex, his German shepherd, who stood beside him with the patience of a soldier awaiting orders. Rex was 6 years old, large and powerfully built, with a coat of black and tan fur that rippled with each breath. His eyes, an intelligent amber, were alert yet calm, the eyes of a creature that understood discipline but had not forgotten gentleness. Once, Rex had served as a military dog, trained for detection and rescue. He had seen the same dust, the same fear, the same blood that Jack had seen. They had met in the middle of chaos overseas, when Rex was barely a year old, and somehow both had survived long enough to outlast everyone else. Now, their bond was wordless but complete. They didn't need language. The rhythm of each other's breathing was enough. The cabin had become their fortress of quiet, a single room, warmed by a small iron stove, and the occasional sound of Rex shifting in his sleep. There were mornings when Jack thought about leaving Duluth, maybe heading south, where the winters didn't bite through bone. But then he'd remember the noise, the crowds, the endless questions people asked when they meant well but didn't understand. Here, he didn't have to explain why he sometimes woke in a cold sweat, or why he kept the rifle above the door, though he hadn't hunted in years. The forest didn't judge him. It simply existed, like him, scarred but enduring. That morning, the snow had fallen deeper than usual. Jack shoveled the path leading to the woodpile, each motion measured, methodical. Rex padded alongside, occasionally stopping to sniff the air. The dog's ears twitched, not fear, but awareness. Jack noticed it too. The woods were too still. No birdsong, no cracking branches under deer hooves, not even the distant moan of the river, shifting beneath its frozen crust. He paused, the shovel halfway in the snow, and listened. Nothing, only the sound of his own breath. He told himself it was the cold, animals hiding, the forest asleep, but the unease didn't fade. "Easy, boy," he murmured. Rex gave a low whine, head tilted toward the line of tree where the forest thickened. Jack followed his gaze. Between the trunks the light shifted. A flicker, maybe just wind through ice. But something about it tugged at the instinct that had kept him alive through years of ambush and silence. He felt that familiar tightening in his chest, that soldier's awareness that never quite leaves. For a long time, Jack had believed his demons stayed behind when he came home, buried under the weight of new winters. But some mornings, like this one, he wasn't so sure. He turned back toward the cabin, shaking the snow from his gloves. Inside, the stove's warmth wrapped around him like an old coat, but even here the quiet pressed too hard. He poured himself coffee from the tin pot on the stove, its bitterness grounding him. Rex settled near the door, still alert, head up, eyes fixed on the frosted window. "You feel it too, huh?" Jack said softly. The dog's tail thumped once against the floorboards. Outside, the light began to fade, though it was still morning. Snow fell again, heavier this time, thick flakes swirling against the glass. Jack walked to the window and peered out. The forest was a blur of white and shadow, and for a moment he thought he saw movement. A figure, small, uncertain, moving along the edge of the frozen river. He blinked, looked again, and saw nothing. Maybe just the wind, maybe something else. He couldn't tell anymore which ghosts were real. He rubbed a hand across his face, the roughness of his beard scratching his palm. "Rex," he said quietly, "stay close." The dog stood immediately, tail stiff, eyes trained on the door. Outside, the wind changed direction. It carried with it a faint sound, not the howl of an animal, but something more human, fragile, lost. Jack froze, the mug halfway to his lips. It came again, distant but unmistakable, a cry, thin as breath but sharp enough to pierce the winter silence. Rex let out a low growl, his body tense, nose pressed to the door. Jack set the cup down slowly. "No one's supposed to be out here," he muttered. But in his chest, something stirred. The old instinct to move toward the sound of danger, not away from it. He reached for his coat. Chapter 2. The little girl in the snow. The night fell heavy and cold, the kind that muffled every sound beneath the weight of new snow. The wind coming off Lake Superior howled through the trees like a restless ghost, rattling the wooden shutters of Jack Miller's cabin. Inside, the stove hissed and popped, casting a dull orange glow against the walls. Jack sat near the fire with a cup of black coffee in his hand, his mind drifting between the hum of the flames and the echo of the cry he'd heard earlier that morning. He had convinced himself it was the wind, maybe a trick of memory, but something inside him had stayed uneasy all day. Rex lay near the door, head on his paws, eyes half closed, but never truly asleep. The dog's instincts, sharpened by years of service, seldom rested. When the first sharp bark tore through the silence, Jack almost dropped his mug. Rex was on his feet, tail stiff, staring toward the window. The sound came again, a bark, urgent, clipped, then a low growl. Jack grabbed his flashlight and stepped into his coat, the cold biting his neck as he opened the door. "Easy, boy. Show me," he murmured. The snow had deepened since morning, soft powder glittering under the thin light of a half-moon. Rex bounded ahead, nose low, moving with the confidence of a creature following something real. Jack followed, his boots crunching into the crusted surface, breath misting in front of him. About 20 yards from the cabin, near the edge of the frozen river, Rex stopped. He looked back once, barked again, then lowered his body, tail wagging slightly, a signal not of threat but discovery. Jack lifted the flashlight, and its beam found movement. A small figure huddled against the trunk of a pine, the snow nearly swallowing her whole. She couldn't have been more than 10. Her dress was red once, but now it hung in tatters, stiff with frost. Her coat, too thin, missing buttons, clung to her shoulders as if it were made of paper. She looked up at the sudden light, her eyes wide and unfocused, the irises a pale green dulled by exhaustion. Her lips were cracked, skin pale beneath a film of ice. Jack felt his stomach tighten. He crouched down, voice low. "Hey there, you okay?" The girl flinched back, arms wrapping around her knees. Rex moved forward, tail low, ears pinned, and gave a soft whine. The girl froze, staring at him. Then something shifted in her expression, fear melting into fragile trust. She reached out one trembling hand toward Rex's muzzle. "It's okay," Jack said softly. "He won't hurt you." The dog leaned forward and sniffed her fingers, then licked the back of her hand once, gentle and careful. That seemed to break something in her. She began to cry, silent, shaking sobs that came from a place far older than her years. Jack took off his glove and touched her shoulder. "You're freezing. Come on. We need to get you inside." Her voice when it came was thin as air. "Please, don't leave me." Jack met her eyes. "I'm not going anywhere." He lifted her carefully, surprised by how light she was, more bone than flesh. Her hair fell over his arm, tangled, dirty blonde, streaked with ice. She clung to him with surprising strength. Rex trotted beside them as they made their way back through the snow. Inside the cabin, Jack wrapped her in a wool blanket, sat her near the stove, and poured water from the kettle into a tin cup. Steam curled upward as he knelt beside her. "What's your name?" he asked. She hesitated, then whispered, "Lily. Lily Carter." "All right, Lily," Jack said. "I'm Jack. This is Rex." The girl nodded, her gaze fixed on the flames. "Where are your folks, Lily? You live around here?" For a long moment, she didn't answer. Then, so softly he almost missed it, she said, "My mom's gone. She got sick last winter. My dad, he left after that. He said he was going to find work in the city, but he never came back." Her voice trembled, but she kept speaking, eyes locked on the fire, as though afraid it might go out. I waited every day. But the food ran out, and the cold came in, and I just started walking. Jack felt a familiar ache deep in his chest, the kind that came with memories you tried to bury. He knew that kind of waiting, the kind that hollowed you out from the inside. He had once waited too, for orders that never came, for friends who never returned. He studied her face, small and drawn, cheeks hollow, freckles lost beneath grime. There was something painfully innocent about her. Yet in her eyes, he saw the kind of endurance only those who'd seen too much could carry. "You're safe here," he said finally. "We'll figure something out in the morning." She nodded weakly and leaned against the wall, her body relaxing as the warmth began to return to her limbs. Rex lay down beside her, resting his head on his paws, close enough for her to touch him. Within minutes, she had fallen asleep, her hands still tangled in his fur. Jack watched them for a long time, the firelight flickering over both their faces. The man who couldn't forget, the child who had no one left to remember. He stood, moved to the window, and looked out into the snow. The forest was silent again, but not empty. Beyond the dark line of trees, the wind shifted, carrying a sound too faint to name, a crunch, deliberate, measured, like footsteps in deep snow. Jack's grip tightened on the windowsill. He turned back to the sleeping girl and the loyal dog. "We're not alone out here," he whispered. The fire had burned down to faint red coals by the time Jack woke to Rex's growl. It wasn't a sharp alarm, more a deep warning rumble that came from his chest. The old veteran sat up on his cot, the chill of the cabin instantly biting at his skin. He reached for the flashlight, the beam slicing through the half-darkness. The snow outside was still falling, soft and steady, but Rex's eyes were locked toward the forest beyond the window. "You hear something?" Jack whispered. The dog's ears pricked, his tail stiffened. The veteran sighed, pulled on his heavy coat, and stepped into the cold, careful not to wake Lily, who still slept curled up near the stove under a blanket. Outside, the world was silent except for the groaning wind off the lake. The moon hung low, hidden behind drifting clouds. Rex moved ahead, his paws barely making a sound on the snow. They followed the tree line down toward the frozen edge of the lake, and that's when Jack saw it, a faint set of tire tracks, nearly buried under fresh snow. They led off the road toward a clearing. He crouched down, his gloved hand brushing the indentations. "Not old," he murmured. "Maybe a few hours." Rex sniffed the air and growled again. Then, from deeper in the woods, came a metallic sound, a sharp clang followed by a low whimper. Jack's body tensed. That sound wasn't the forest. He motioned for Rex to stay low and followed the noise, stepping carefully through the underbrush. When they reached the clearing, the beam of Jack's flashlight caught something glinting, a steel trap half buried in snow. Inside it, caught by the leg, was a wolf. The animal's fur, once white, was now matted with blood and dirt. Its sides heaved weakly as it struggled to move. Jack's breath clouded in front of him as he crouched near. "Damn poachers," he muttered. The sight triggered memories he had buried years ago. Soldiers screaming in the dark, the sound of metal clashing, the helplessness of watching something die because someone else was careless. He clenched his jaw. "Easy," he whispered to the wolf. "I'm not here to hurt you." The animal bared its teeth weakly, but its eyes told a different story. Fear, not malice. He reached for his knife and began working the hinge of the trap. Rex stayed beside him, ears flattened, whining softly. After several tense minutes, the trap finally gave way. The wolf tried to crawl but collapsed, exhausted. Jack looked around. The clearing wasn't empty. More traps lay half hidden under the snow, and he spotted the remains of a campfire. Cigarette butts, a few empty cans, tire marks. Whoever had done this hadn't gone far. He scanned the ground, noticing boot prints heading toward the north trail. Then, suddenly, he heard voices, male, rough, laughing low. "Told you it'd fetch more if we take the pelt clean," one said. "We'll come back for the rest in the morning. Cold'll keep 'em fresh." Jack's hand tightened around the knife. There were at least two of them, maybe three. He pulled Rex behind a fallen log and waited as the voices came closer. Through the branches, he saw two men in heavy hunting coats, rifles slung over their shoulders. One was tall and broad-shouldered, his beard thick and black, a scar running down his cheek. The other was shorter, wiry, with narrow eyes and a constant twitch at the corner of his mouth. They looked like locals, maybe from the outlying towns, the kind who worked odd jobs in summer and hunted whatever they could in winter. The taller one spat into the snow. "We'll set more traps by the south bank tomorrow. If the ranger's still snooping, we'll handle it." "Handle it?" the short one said, grinning. "You mean like last time?" The tall man didn't answer, just shouldered his rifle and walked off toward the lake road. Jack waited until their voices faded, then rose slowly. He turned to Rex. "Come on, boy. We're not letting this go." Back at the cabin, the wolf limped beside him for a few yards before stopping, as if understanding it had reached the limit of safety. Jack crouched and looked into its yellow eyes. "You'll make it," he said softly. "Stay away from the traps." Then he stood and watched the creature limp into the trees until it vanished into the white. When he entered the cabin again, Lily was awake, sitting near the fire, clutching the blanket tightly around her shoulders. Her eyes widened when she saw the blood on his gloves. "You're hurt?" "Not mine," he said, hanging his coat. "Go back to sleep." But she didn't. "You went out there, didn't you?" she asked, voice trembling. "To where they are." Jack froze. "You know about them?" Lily nodded slowly. "They came to the cabin where I used to live. They said my dad owed them money. Mom told them to leave, but they had guns." Her voice broke, and she buried her face in her hands. Jack felt the old anger stir again, that helpless fury that never really left. He looked toward the dark window, where the forest waited. Outside, somewhere in that cold vastness, men were hunting not for survival, but for cruelty. And for the first time in years, Jack Miller felt the soldier inside him wake again. The storm rolled in before dawn, a white fury swallowing the horizon. Snow hammered the cabin walls, and the air itself seemed to hum with the cold. Jack Miller stood by the window, his breath misting against the glass, watching as the last flicker of the outside world disappeared beneath the blizzard. Rex paced near the door, restless, his ears twitching at sounds only he could hear. In the corner, Lily sat bundled in layers of blankets, her small frame trembling, not from the chill, but from a fear she couldn't yet name. She clutched Rex's old collar in her hands, the metal tag tapping softly like a heartbeat. "They'll come back, won't they?" she asked. Jack didn't answer right away. His eyes were fixed on the storm, but his mind was already moving, calculating distances, patterns, memories of ambushes long past. "Yeah," he said finally, "they will." By afternoon, the storm had become a wall of ice and wind. Visibility dropped to almost nothing. Jack knew the cabin wouldn't hold if they were found. It was too exposed, too open. He gathered a small pack, food, a map, his rifle, and an old emergency flare kit. "We're moving," he said. "Now." Lily looked up, her face pale, lips chapped. "In this?" "Better the storm than the men behind it." Rex barked once, as if in agreement. They left through the back door, trudging through waist-deep snow toward an old rescue station. Jack remembered from his days patrolling the lakeshore years ago. It wasn't far, maybe a mile along the frozen river, but every step felt heavier than the last. The wind clawed at their faces, and ice stung their skin like needles. Twice Lily stumbled, and each time Jack lifted her with one arm while holding the rifle with the other. Rex moved ahead, cutting through the drifts, his fur coated in frost, but his pace steady. When they finally reached the station, a wooden outpost half buried under snow, it was nearly dark. Jack forced the door open, snow spilling across the floor. Inside was cold, but there was shelter, and a half-collapsed cot they could use for kindling. He got the fire going quickly. The faint orange glow painted their faces, fragile but alive. "You'll be safe here for now," Jack said, though he didn't believe it himself. As night fell, the wind shifted, and with it came something worse. Over the howl of the storm, Rex growled, low and guttural. Jack went still, listening. Faint but clear, the crunch of footsteps in the snow echoed from outside. He moved to the window, careful not to disturb the frost along its edge. Shapes emerged through the blowing white. 3 figures, dressed in heavy parkas, rifles slung across their backs. At their front was the tall man from before, the one with the scar. His face was hard and angular, illuminated by the flare of a cigarette between his teeth. He moved like someone used to control, methodical and unhurried. The shorter man trailed behind, muttering curses, while a third figure, someone new, walked with a limp, younger, barely in his 20s, his cheeks red from cold, eyes darting nervously. Jack guessed he was no hardened criminal, just a desperate kid caught in bad company. "They found us," Lily whispered. Jack turned to her, his expression unreadable. "Stay low. Don't make a sound." He checked his rifle. 1 full clip, 3 loose rounds in his pocket. Not much. The odds were bad, but he'd faced worse. He cracked the window slightly and fired a warning shot into the air. The report echoed across the lake, swallowed by the wind. For a heartbeat, there was silence. Then came the answering crack of return fire, bullets slamming into the wood outside. Lily screamed, covering her ears. Jack pulled her down behind a crate. "It's all right. They don't know where we are." Rex barked, teeth bared, standing between them and the door. "Come out, old man." The voice outside was rough and mocking. It belonged to the scarred man. "You've got something that ain't yours. We just want the girl. Step aside, and maybe we let you live." Jack's blood ran cold. So it was Lily they were after. He looked at her small, terrified face, the way she clung to Rex's fur, and something inside him hardened. He crawled to the old flare kit, pulling out 2 sticks of magnesium. If the storm was going to hide them, he'd make it work in his favor. "When I say go," he whispered to Lily, "you run for that ridge behind the cabin. Stay with Rex. No matter what happens, don't stop." She shook her head violently, tears streaking down her cheeks. "I can't." "You can." His voice softened. "You're stronger than you think." The gunfire started again, closer now. Jack lit the flares, their blinding red light flaring through the storm. He threw one toward the tree line, the other onto the frozen river. The sudden brightness threw their attackers off, and in that brief confusion, Jack stepped out into the snow, rifle steady. He moved like he had years ago in the desert, low, controlled, every motion measured. He fired once, hitting the snow near the younger man's feet. The boy fell back, shouting, "Stop! He's serious!" The scarred man snarled and raised his gun, but before he could shoot, Rex lunged from the doorway, knocking him into the snow. The chaos was instant. Gunfire, wind, the roar of the lake. Jack grabbed Lily's hand and ran into the blinding white, his heart pounding. Behind them, Rex's bark echoed through the storm until it was swallowed by the wind. The storm had passed by dawn, leaving the world silent and bruised beneath a pale morning sky. Snowdrifts towered like frozen waves along the riverbank. The aftermath of chaos carved into the landscape. Jack Miller trudged through the powder, his body aching, his coat torn from the night before. The wind had gentled, but the cold still clung to him like a memory. Beside him, Rex limped slightly, fur matted with ice and streaks of dried blood, yet his gait remained steady. Behind them, Lily stumbled, holding tight to Rex's tail as if it were the only solid thing left in her world. Her cheeks were raw from frost, her small boots soaked through, but her eyes were bright, alive. The storm had not broken her. It had forged her. They moved through the thinning fog until Jack saw movement ahead, the flashing red-blue pulse of police lights. He raised his hand in instinct, signaling Lily to stay behind. 2 officers emerged from behind their vehicles, rifles slung low but cautious. One of them, Officer Dean Porter, was a broad man in his 40s with a weathered face and the stoic air of someone who had seen too many winters in Duluth. His dark hair was cropped short, his breath visible in the cold. "Drop the weapon!" he shouted, his voice cutting through the quiet. Jack slowly raised his hands. "Easy, officer. Name's Jack Miller. There are poachers in the woods, armed. They're the ones you want." Dean's eyes narrowed. "We've been tracking them since last night. Locals called in gunshots near the old rescue station. You're the vet that lives out near the ridge, aren't you?" Jack nodded. "Used to be," he said dryly. Dean gestured for his partner, a young woman named Officer Claire Yates, to move ahead. She was in her early 30s, lean, with sharp green eyes and a calm focus that contrasted her partner's bulk. Her blonde hair was tied back tightly, the only softness about her the slight quiver of empathy in her gaze when she noticed Lily standing behind Jack. "There's a child," she murmured, stepping forward. "Are you hurt, sweetheart?" Lily shook her head, clutching Rex's fur. "They tried to take me," she whispered. Claire knelt down, lowering her voice. "You're safe now." Behind them, the wind carried faint voices, angry, struggling. Moments later, 3 officers dragged the poachers out from the trees, hands bound, faces streaked with snow and fury. The scarred man glared at Jack with an expression that mixed hatred and disbelief. "You should have stayed out of it, old man," he spat. Jack met his gaze, cold and unwavering. "You picked the wrong forest." The younger man among them, the one with the limp, kept his head bowed, shoulders shaking. "I didn't want this," he said quietly. "They said it was just for money." Dean cuffed him tighter, but said nothing. The snow absorbed their words, muffling the edges of anger and regret. Later, as the police loaded the men into their vehicles, Dean turned to Jack. "You saved the girl's life. You'll need to give a statement downtown." Jack nodded wearily. "As long as she comes to," Claire smiled faintly. "We'll see that she's taken care of." At the station later that morning, the fluorescent lights felt harsh after the soft gray of snow. Lily sat wrapped in a borrowed blanket, sipping hot cocoa that steamed between her small hands. A social worker entered, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and the calm professionalism of someone used to broken stories. Her name was Mrs. Patterson, tall and slender, with silver hair pulled into a loose bun. "Lily," she said gently, crouching down to meet the girl's eyes, "we've found you a place with a foster family in town. They'll take good care of you." Lily's hands tightened around the cup. "Can Rex come?" Mrs. Patterson hesitated. "Honey, dogs like that, they usually stay with their owners." Jack, who had been leaning against the wall, straightened. "She's not going anywhere without him." Mrs. Patterson looked between them, studying the man's rough face, the exhaustion behind his gray-blue eyes, and the way Lily's small figure leaned toward him like a shadow seeking warmth. "You live alone, Mr. Miller?" she asked. "Out near the Superior Ridge. Used to serve with the 101st. And now?" "Now I just keep the fire going." Mrs. Patterson nodded slowly, her intuition filling the silence. "Perhaps it's time that fire warms more than just you." Hours later, the paperwork was filed. Jack signed the line declaring him Lily's temporary guardian, his handwriting rough but steady. When they left the station, the afternoon sun had turned the snow to glitter. The world looked softer somehow, less empty. Back at the cabin, Jack repaired the stove while Lily brushed Rex's fur by the window. The dog stretched out on the floor, eyes half closed, a quiet sentinel in the glow of the fire. Lily glanced up, smiling shyly. "Does this mean we're a family now?" Jack paused, looking at her, this small survivor who had wandered into his solitude like a fragment of lost light. "Yeah," he said softly, "I suppose it does." That night, the forest outside was still. The storm had spent its rage. Snowflakes drifted lazily under the porch light, and the faint hum of the frozen lake whispered like a lullaby. Inside, warmth filled the cabin for the first time in years. Jack sat in his chair, Rex asleep at his feet, and Lily curled up beneath a quilt, breathing evenly. For a long time, he simply watched the fire dance, feeling something he hadn't felt in decades: peace. Outside, the moon rose over Lake Superior, casting a silver glow through the frost-glazed windows. Winter still held the land, but within the small cabin by the woods, the last light of the season burned steady, a promise that even in the coldest places, warmth can be found again. In the frozen silence of a northern winter, warmth does not always come from fire. Sometimes it comes from faith, from the quiet courage to reach out and love again. Jack, Lily, and Rex were not brought together by chance. They were brought together by something greater, a hand unseen, a mercy that moves even through storms. Some call it luck, others call it fate. But those who have seen the cold and survived it know the truth. It was grace. Because every act of kindness, no matter how small, is a spark of God's own light in this dark world. When Jack opened his door that night, he didn't just save a child, he answered a prayer. And perhaps, in ways he could never name, his own prayer was answered too. If you believe in second chances, in love that finds us when all seems lost, then share this story. Leave a comment about someone who once became your miracle. Subscribe to our channel to keep these stories of faith and hope alive. May God bless you and your loved ones, and may His light guide you, even through the longest winter nights.